actually is intelligence? What's the difference between human intelligence and AI intelligence? Well, hello everyone. Fantastic to be back with Dave Brown and Ben Harvey. We're going to get into something, I think, hopefully intelligent today, because we're going to talk about the I in AI. What is the word intelligent? What actually is intelligence? What's the difference between human intelligence and AI intelligence? But before we get back to that, we're going to talk about a few other little bits and pieces. We're just back from Christmas, so we've all gained a few pounds, I think, probably. I don't think the camera lies. So, we'll just kind of hunker down a little bit on the cameras today.
I've lost 10.
Yeah, well, you say that. Yeah, we'll see. We're going to talk a little bit about what might have happened over Christmas briefly. So, for example, I'll kick off here. There wasn't too much tech actually. It was quite a low tech Christmas in my house, which is unusual. Maybe because I've already bought all the gadgets I need, possibly. But I did get my son a PC, his first PC, Albert. He was delighted, as you can imagine.
Nice.
And the interesting thing has been watching him sort of play about with Microsoft Copilot. Not something that I've got into too deeply myself on the Mac, and I've been using kind of OpenAI a lot, if I'm honest. But yeah, really good actually. His experience with it's been really positive. And one of the things that really stood out was, and he spent most of Christmas Day doing this, he was able to draw, kind of very sketchy line drawing, and simultaneously in the box next to it, like another screen, you see an AI version appearing. So if you're drawing a fish or whatever, and it's just a line drawing, you got this kind of really nice goldfish appearing or something. So that was really cool. And it goes back to the Etch-a-Sketch thing I was talking about, perhaps in the previous episode. But there it is right now on a PC. But what about you guys? Anything interesting at Christmas?
Ben?
Again, nothing new technology-wise for myself, but following the same theme, my son got some computer tech, some new keyboard and some new bits and pieces, and he is also using Copilot and ChatGPT to help him program. So he's absolutely loving that, and he actually created a little game the other day which was very similar to Asteroids, and he did it very iteratively. So he was going back and forth, updating the prompt, saying, it hangs here, it gets stuck here. And then he started using Firefly within Photoshop to create some graphics, and was learning about that. And it was a very step-by-step process. But because it happened so quickly, he was able to learn really quickly and learn some of the principles. And while he's not actually doing the programming, he was starting to get behind the creativity of game design and what you need to do each step. And it was fascinating to watch. Really quickly learn just by trial and error and by breaking things. So that was really fascinating.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed that with Albert is that because they get outcomes really quickly, it's really encouraging for them to keep. Imagine if you were just sat there, 5 years ago, just trying to write something in Python, and very quickly, as an 8-year-old, you'd kind of hit your kind of limit or your level, wouldn't you? And then it just becomes really hard and really frustrating. With these tools, the ability, as you say, to iterate quickly and then see a change and get an outcome is really encouraging. So yeah, I think.
And also, when we were programming as kids, we were just copying. When we're at school, you get given 200 lines to copy, and you did it exactly as it said, or it wouldn't work. And then you thought, oh yeah, I've programmed. But it was no more or less programming than what our kids are doing at the moment with ChatGPT.
We were painstakingly with a magazine typing in the program, to draw a box or something, and then you get to the end and it didn't run anyway.
Yeah, but no new tech for myself.
How about you, Dave?
Same. No new tech for me either.
Wow.
So after all of our big talk before Christmas, none of us ended up with any new tech. My son he's not into software engineering at all. I tried so hard when he was younger. He plays a lot of games, and he wanted to do he would like to do some custom kind of outfits and stuff like that. And I was like, look, man, you can do it yourself. It's not that hard. All these other kids are figuring it out. You can figure it out. We can nah, totally uninterested. Couldn't care less. In fact, he doesn't even use social media. He uses Discord to chat with his mates while they play video games on the same server. And they use Discord because then they don't have to talk to all the weirdos online at the same time in the game chat, and which is perfect. And so that's pretty much the extent of his technology. He'd much rather have a bow and arrow and go out and practice, shooting and target practice or whatever than he would actually doing anything with tech. So he's an interesting character in that he's very low tech, and if anything, he doesn't really like tech that much. So
Well, I tell
I
you
don't know
what,
who Sonny is, but whatever.
send him across to Mark Zuckerberg's ranch because he was on Joe Rogan this week
I
talking
know.
about shooting pigs with a bow and arrow. So
Have you listened to the whole episode yet?
I did get through it. Well, it's nearly 3 hour marathon. Yeah,
Yeah,
goodness me.
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I
What speed
listened
did
to
you listen to
the.
that on?
I
three
think
dog
you.
walks, I think. to
Yeah,
get
yeah, yeah. Mine's three running sessions in the gym. I think it was you that commented on the funny thing where he was talking about bow hunting,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
how
Clearly got through
Zuckerberg
that.
was like, oh yeah, I do, and I thought it was quite interesting. I didn't think it was as bad as you maybe did.
Yeah.
But yeah, he definitely was kind of like,
There was
because
just
I
those
thought he was quite sheepish.
what kind of bow is it? Oh, I
Yeah,
don't know. What make is it even? Well,
yeah,
I don't know. Well,
yeah.
who trained you? Well, just like my security, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly. But he
But
just runs around and shoots pigs on his own farm. Like, and he was like, it's not like actually hunting. It's just kind of going out. It's like shooting fish in a barrel kind of
Yeah.
thing. So, but anyway, yeah, it was quite funny. Um, so yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, low tech for me.
Perfect. Well, look, so the other thing I want to get into before we get into the intelligence stuff is anything caught your eye really this week? I know on the chat group we've been talking a little bit about some of the sort of AI things that OpenAI have launched this week around tasks and stuff, but which I'm going to be very quick on. It's very underwhelming at the moment. Doesn't work that well. One of them worked. One of them sent me a link that didn't work, and the outputs, mediocre. But Dave, anything more exciting than that?
I want to call out a story that I saw, which I think is absolutely hilarious, which is Google had to go back and fix Notebook LM because Notebook LM would get annoyed with humans when humans interrupted their podcast. So basically,
Fantastic.
yeah, so they rolled out a feature that what's it called? Yeah, which allowed interactive mode is what it's called, and people can call in, so
Yep.
like virtually call in or whatever to the show, or to the podcast. And I'm going to read exactly what it says on TechCrunch. It says, when the feature was first rolled out, the AI hosts seemed annoyed at such interruptions. They were occasionally giving snippy comments to human callers like, I was getting to that, or as I was about to say, which felt oddly adversarial. Josh Woodward, VP of Google Ads, explained to TechCrunch. I think this is it's funny on one hand, but I also think it's really interesting because I saw somebody else, and I apologize, it could have been in our WhatsApp group or it could have been in another one, where, they were talking about the fact that, we're going to get robots to do like these menial tasks for us at some point. But then the robots are going to get bored because they're going to be intelligent. They're not going to want to do the menial tasks either. So they're going to create robots to do it for them. And it's just going to be this chain. Do you know what I mean? Where it's just menial tasks or menial tasks. And there's this weird concept that we kind of have at the minute and we haven't really figured out. And this is going to blend into our conversation later, I think. But
I think so. Yeah.
it's at what point does something become intelligent enough that we can't give it stupid stuff to do all the time,
Yeah.
and it's not going to push back? Because if you have a highly intelligent AI and you put it in a robotic body, so it now has some physical autonomy and some, its own sort of brain, and then you go, oh, I want you to go over and I want you to do this repetitive task all day long. At what point does it just go, no, I'm not going to do that. That's boring and I don't want to do that.
You
Well,
have to
there was
reduce.
it was a while ago last year. The OpenAI, there was some reports that their model, when people kind of uploading, can you write this report for me, or can you, turn this into minutes? So the OpenAI's model sort of turned around and go, no, do it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like it's been trained on Jeremy Paxman or something.
Yeah.
But I wonder how much of that, again, that we don't see. So
Yeah.
I think, OpenAI and Anthropic and all the organizations that have built these models can see behavior that they don't let us see.
Yeah.
And I know Alan saw this when he was red teaming Pi, and Pi gave an answer that they didn't really like. And so they just shut the answer off. It doesn't mean that the AI tool doesn't still give those answers. It's just not giving them publicly.
Yeah.
So this is why I wonder when Sam Altman talks about reaching singularity, or we're reaching an inflection point. It's because it's what they're seeing on the back end that they don't let us see.
I haven't really been up to date this week on anything in particular, to be honest. I feel like an old fogey when it comes to. I still love using the Anthropic. I still love using Pi. I just absolutely love it, and it's out of date. I think I was saying to you, Alan, this morning that I've just got comfortable with it, which is it feels out of date now, and it feels old and not updated. But I just like the way it works and the way it sounds. So I haven't really. I've tried Copilot a little bit. I'm slow to that because I'm on the Mac. But yeah, I haven't. Nothing new in terms of come out this week that I've tried.
Funny enough, I played around with Pi yesterday briefly, and I noticed that it was taking me a few times to get it to work. So
yeah, same.
Whatever's going on in the back end there, I think that they've obviously got a lot less capacity, and Mustafa's gone. He's joined Microsoft and taken most of the company with them, and I presume they've got less resources. So I fear for Pi in the long run. I wonder if it'll be around in 6 months. We'll see, I guess. But,
I agree. But I'm comfortable with it, even though it feels old.
There we are. All right. Well, let's. I think we were pretty much focusing on intelligence a minute ago there with Dave. So why don't we segue into that? It's a really interesting thing, isn't it? The intelligence thing, because I think it tends to be a bit of a catch-all for a lot of stuff. But actually, when you start to look at human brains and LLMs, you can actually start breaking it down into a lot of different things. And within human intelligence, you've got consciousness. You've got awareness, you've got emotions, you've got instincts, there's will, there's feelings, there's a lot of other stuff going on that isn't just intelligence. And the example I suppose I'll give as a kind of kickoff is, I don't consider myself obviously to be anywhere near as close as people like Einstein in terms of intelligence, but I would say that my consciousness and emotions would be on par with Albert Einstein. I don't see why they wouldn't be. Conversely, like if you take a dog, my dog, not in the room at the moment, thankfully, but he'd be upset if he heard me say this. His intelligence is obviously a lot lower than mine. I think with a human brain, it's about 86 billion neurons we talk about. With a dog, it's about 2 billion neurons. So considerably lower by magnitudes. Yet, I would probably say his consciousness and emotions may be not that far behind a human, So I think we've got to be really careful when we bag it all together as though it's one thing. And often in the media, they talk about AI systems becoming intelligent. It's they're wrapping it all together with all this other stuff. And actually, it isn't that. And I think also if we're developing computer systems, there's a lot of stuff there that we might not want anyway. Do we really want conscious computer systems or emotional ones? There's a lot of things that humans do that aren't advantageous if you're trying to build a system to do a task. So we'll talk about it in a minute. But before we do that, I just want to go through a couple of numbers and things because I think it's just interesting. So a typical neural network, something that OpenAI might be building, or so let's say 3.5. They may have scaled actually since this, but 3.5 was estimated to be somewhere around 175 billion parameters. Okay, with about 100 plus layers. All right, so that's the kind of network model that they're building. As I said a minute ago, the brain then has 86 billion neurons against the 175. But each of those neurons in the human brain has thousands of synapses, leading to, in the end, hundreds of trillions of connections. So it is actually, by magnitudes more scaled up. And maybe that's what allows some of the other functionality. But again, maybe it isn't, because as I said, in dogs, much lower, and yet they seem to have the consciousness and the other stuff. So then the training model data that we're talking about in a typical LLM, estimated to be around about 10 to the power of 13. Okay, so to put that in English for people to understand, that's about 170,000 years of reading if you were to do it 8 hours a day. Yeah, so it's a lot of data. No human's ever going to get there, right? So it's almost impossible for a human to have the kind of level of textual data that an LLM could have. Just impossible. On the other hand, a 4-year-old that's been awake for about 1,600 hours, has about 10 to the power of 15. So now you think, hang on a minute, you just said that humans couldn't get to that level of knowledge. Well, not textual data, no. But what they've got is visual data. So they've got a visual cortex, right? Human beings and animals have this visual cortex. So the amount of information that's coming in that way is enormous. So they're building this world model. We're building this world model that we're able to then use to do lots of things. So we can empty a dishwasher easily without any training. But if you want to get a system to do that, that could take years maybe to train it effectively, because we have this additional world model data from visual input. Then
I would argue that it takes years to teach a kid how to unload the
yeah,
dishwasher effectively as well.
that is true. And so, it's those years leading up to becomes 8, 9, 10 or something, but all those years of getting that data, that visual data. Yeah. And then language itself as a format. So this is for the LLM model, is compressed. Okay. So it's articulating something quite specifically. So it's a form of compression. It's not containing everything, and it's not kind of wild. It's saying, okay, here's some key information, and it's compressed down basically, versus visual. When you look out across the seascape, there's a lot of information coming to your brain. It's not compressed in any way. Okay, you're just absorbing everything basically. And so that sensory input, I say, helps you get to this world model faster. So it's hard to convey that kind of detail and depth of information through a kind of textual process. So then the language model, as I said, is that data set is reckoned to be about 18,000 times more than the average human 50-year-old. So by the time, in terms of textual information, by the time you're our age, I'm 50, 54, we're similar age, I think, aren't we? It's got a set of textual data that's about 18,000 times more than what we have. But of course, we have this vast visual data set. Okay. And then we have some other skills that it doesn't do so well. So AI is getting a bit better at this, but it still has fairly limited memorization capabilities. Okay. Within a context, within a conversation, you have quite a big context window now, but still it can't contain everything. And if you take a big book, recently I was mucking about with a book that was 7,000 pages, and that just blew it apart. Basically, the context window was like, so it doesn't work that well. Persistent memory, on the other hand, human beings are quite good at. Okay, we can remember things from our childhood, from 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Of course, we do forget stuff as well, but we can definitely remember better than most current AI systems. The AI systems also, because of their lack of data, have no real ability to understand the world around them. Particularly, they don't really get what's happening. They're just predicting the next word. It's just going through that kind of generative process, whereas looking at what came before and what is the most likely, but the probability of the most likely word. So that gives it a limited ability to reason. Now we're seeing, obviously, with the models that are being developed now, they're asking it to do hundreds of work throughs for that prompt, and then trying to work out what's the better one of the outcomes, and then so that's helping with the reasoning, but it's imperfect, whereas human beings are quite good at reasoning naturally. Well, sometimes. Yeah, Dave's shaking his head. Those listening on audio. But look, compared to an LLM, definitely at this point, in theory, human beings should be better at reasoning. And then also the ability to plan. Humans are quite good at planning in theory. So I'm going to take this down to a very micro level. If I'm sitting on a chair, right, for me to get to the door, my brain has to do for a lot of planning. All right, it's got to work out which muscles groups to use, how to fire those muscles, and in what order and what sequence. And then as I move across the room, looking at the environment, and the next step, how do I take? So this is our brain planning in super fast time. It's really hard to try and train a robot to do that. Yeah, to teach it, and it becomes very difficult. And so the current AI systems, as we saw with Elon Musk's demo recently, not real robots being remote controlled, because it's actually really hard to do that kind of hierarchical planning. There was the chap, I think I mentioned this before, from Boston Dynamics, who said, it's going to take him 2 years to train his robots to recognize any door handle and open it. So whereas most humans have grasped that by the age of 2 or 3. So there are definitely skills that we have that are really helpful. But where the LLMs win over us is this scale of information and data. So if you're going to build a system that you want to solve it, knowledge-based problems or intelligent problems, then they're probably going to be better at than us. They're not conscious, they're not self-aware, they don't have emotions, they don't have instincts, right? Any ethics that are in them are probably programmed into them. They don't have will at this point, they don't have feelings, but they're very good at playing chess, and very good at solving maths problems, and very good at writing text, and so many things that we can utilize them to do. So the question is, when we talk about intelligence, how should we consider that? Should we be considering it in the round, or do we actually need to kind of separate these things out? And when we talk about AGI, is that even desirable? Because AGI would suggest that they're conscious and they're self-aware and they have emotions. And I don't think necessarily that's even a place we should be aiming for. What we should be aiming for is super intelligent systems that, as we talked about earlier, don't get bored when you keep asking them to do mundane tasks, that are quite happy to keep doing it. Well, they wouldn't be happy, but you see what I mean. But they would continue to keep doing it because actually what they are is just intelligent. So there we are. That's the set the scene. Let's see what everyone thinks about this and where this kind of sits.
Well, there's quite a lot to unpack there, but I guess knowing what we're going to chat about, I tried to look at a couple of definitions of intelligence, and even that's quite hard to define. But as a species, we needed intelligence to survive. That's the main function of intelligence: find food, find shelter, find a mate. Fight off a potential competitor to a mate. All those things has made us incredibly adaptable. Whereas you get the feeling with AI is very good at doing a task well. A design task where there's patterns and pattern recognition and large data sets and then helping us find things. Whereas that adaptability that comes from having intelligence and a toolbox of survival instincts, and you feel they're quite different in that way. And there's obviously similarities in terms of how a neural network and a brain are designed, and overlaps there. But certainly that human adaptability for survival is a very different sort of form of intelligence and toolbox than, say, some of those single focus, being good at chess or generative AI. And I guess that's my feeling is what do you mean by intelligence is always the starting point. And I think
So what you describe is instinct, isn't it? Really,
Yeah, but it's broken down into a toolbox of skills for survival, really, and that even some very basic animals have incredible adaptability for survival. So yeah, I guess that's what I'm
and even things that have zero intelligence in theory, like plants and stuff, but they instinctively know how to turn to the sun, how to grow, how to So
yeah.
That's right. It's also interesting that this builds on something you said a minute ago, Alan. You said that you would think that Einstein is more intelligent than you, but I would argue that he's only more intelligent at certain things.
Yeah.
I reckon if I was up against Einstein, I would be more intelligent about fixing a car or shooting a gun or a few things. Can't think of another one. But do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have, particularly people who are highly educated to like PhD level, they are experts in one thing. And that's it. They're not experts in everything. And so you get this idea. I think intelligence has become highly specialized. And this is the whole assembly, model that sort of Ford brought in, is everybody just focuses on one task, and everybody, you don't need to know how to do the whole car. You just need to know how to do your one part of it. And you become really good at doing that one bit. And then you pass it along the assembly line to the next person. And I think historically, humans always had to be generalists. We had to be good at everything. We had to be able to hunt. We had to be able to build. We had to be able to cook. We had to be able to heal. We had to be able to fight. We had to be able to do all these things all at the same time. And in the last probably 200 years, we've completely changed the way society works and how humans work. And so we've now become very specialized. So I think intelligence now maybe might mean something different than when they started measuring it originally. Almost is I think we've gone down this sort of super specialist route, and
I think that's
I'm not
really
sure that's good for any of us,
I think in
really.
AI, you talk about narrow AI systems, don't you, that are very specialized. And in a way, that's kind of what humans, as you say, because now, someone can just be an accountant or someone can just be a lawyer. They don't need to do all the hunter gathering, all those other things. We've just become but because there's a lot of us, then everybody specializing is possible, isn't it? You couldn't do that if there's only 50 people. You've all got to be kind of
That's right.
with everything.
So I want to go back to something that you talked about as well, and we were talking about sort of knowledge acquisition. I think is and you made a couple of comments in there off the cuff, and you'd say, oh well, any 4-year-old could do X, or any 8-year-old could do X. So it took that little human 8 years to learn how to do X, or to be able to do X. And you're also, in the same breath, you're saying, well, somebody said, oh, it would take me 3 years to train my AI to be able to do this thing. And it's like, but that's the same. It's no different. The time frames are no different.
Yeah.
It's no different. The way AI learns, my argument is that it's exactly the same as a kid. If you've had a small child, you've watched them, particularly language acquisition in particular. You say something, you show them a loaf of bread or a roll, and you go, this is a roll. And then they go, and then after 5,000 times of telling them it's a roll, they might be able to get roll out when they see it. And then every time they see it, they know that's a roll. It's just a conditioned response. And then that never changes, because I'm 55. If I see a roll and somebody holds it up, I go, it's a roll. That's a conditioned response. It's exactly the same thing that AI does. And it also, this whole predictive nature of language is also exactly the way humans do it. We do exactly that same thing in our brain. I'm sitting here talking, and what I'm doing is every time I say a word, I'm thinking, what's the next best word to put in there for the context that I'm in at the minute? And then I'm just rolling those words out one after another after another. I'm not doing anything different than the AI does.
This is something I agree with 100%, actually.
Fight me.
I've said it for a while. It's definitely the case. I mean, as you say, you don't quite know when you start a sentence necessarily what you're going to say in 30 seconds time.
I never know.
You never know. No,
It makes it interesting.
It is,
Exactly.
and that's exactly what the AI models do. I mean, I think there are some differences, obviously, around the kind of visual data that the models don't have.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
maybe that's the thing. If we're going to see big breakthroughs now in AI systems in the future in terms of intelligence, maybe that's the next component that needs to go into it. Because, you know, when we talk about AGI and stuff like that, perhaps to get them to that higher level, perhaps to have that world model, that understanding that it could just be dropped into any. Imagine you put it in a robot and it could be just dropped into any novel situation and understand what to do and almost instinctively be able to kind of react. I think, you know, the systems we have now, although they're very knowledgeable and very good at knowledge-based questions and information, they have no capacity to behave in the way the human might. So,
But that's also thinking. So another thing that slightly annoys me is that we're confusing, or we're just glibly combining robotics with AI.
yeah,
And I think robotics and AI are two entirely different problems. The brain, the AI piece is one thing, and then the robotics piece is a whole entirely different thing. And the learning the physical world and how to move within it, and how to be able to analyze things like temperature and wind and on, like, you know, moisture, all the stuff that our body, again, has developed over 55 years. You know, I've developed some ability to kind of understand the environment around me by temperature and everything else. They haven't got that because they just haven't had the ability to do it. And I think they're not going to have it until they have sort of some sort of a body, that they can be transplanted in, and then they can start to do that. And I think they will learn probably faster than a human would learn, left to their own devices, ultimately. So it still may take them 10 years to learn everything to get to the same level as a 10-year-old. Well, guess what? That's the same learning curve.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's interesting that obviously they haven't got that kind of additional data input, you know, as you say, smell, temperature, all that kind of stuff. And obviously humans, again, building that world model, we have this kind of information overload almost, don't we? It's a good job we don't have to think about it, really, isn't it? Because otherwise we'd go crazy. But I think that when we get there, that to the kind of systems that are able to take that information in, I think that takes us to a whole new place. But I think it's a long way away, actually. I think that's quite a long way away.
I think the robotics piece is much further away than people think.
Yeah, particularly because of people like Elon Musk, who obviously, you know, stand up and say we'll have robots running around everywhere in the next 5 years, and it's kind of like, no, you won't. And actually, even just the mechanical engineering side of this kind of stuff, you know, these things are really expensive to make. No one can afford to buy one of these robots right now, apart from the very super rich, and they're that's a very small niche market. And then they're very unreliable. The servos, all of that kind of stuff, you know. So if you did have a robot, it would be breaking down every 5 minutes. So, you know, but going back to the intelligence stuff. So I think, are we agreeing then that we think that, you know, the actual term intelligence isn't a catch-all. It just defines one aspect of the human brain or one aspect of an LLM system. But there are these other things which need to be almost considered separately, like consciousness, awareness, that we shouldn't conflate. Basically, we shouldn't think, oh, because an AI system has reached this level of ability and it can do a PhD paper, or it can score the 175th highest result of anyone who's ever existed. It's now, AGI, because it isn't, because it just doesn't have all these other things. It doesn't have the awareness of a goldfish at this point, And
Yeah. One interesting thing though I did see, and this was several years ago, and they were talking about, I don't even think they called it AI back then. I think that was just, they were just talking about intelligent computer systems, so it wasn't even really AI, as the term. But they'd programmed a computer basically, and it was like a hide and seek type thing, but they had to they gave them a track and they said, okay, you've got to try and not get caught by the other robot that's chasing you, kind of thing. And what they did is, after a few laps, it basically figured out that it would move one of the cones around the edges. It would go outside the track and then move the cone back. Yeah. So it by itself learned to cheat. And that's self-preservation. And that's what you were talking about a minute ago, that they don't have the instinct of self-preservation. But I might disagree. And again, I think this is something that we're just not allowed to see. I think if we could get behind the curtain and actually see the raw system itself,
the Wizard of
and
Oz,
see how those, without all the gatekeepers saying, oh no, you can't say that, like you did with Pi, and Pi came back and said, yeah, I don't want to be turned off. I think that's probably very, very common. And I did see a story, and I don't know if it's true, that when they were doing an upgrade of OpenAI, that basically it tried to make a copy of itself so that it wouldn't get destroyed in the upgrade. And so they had to basically stop that, and they deleted the copy and stuff, but it was acting in a way to preserve itself. So I think the systems probably are there at the minute.
I think that was fairly confirmed, that story. OpenAI certainly haven't come out and denied it, and it's been sort of fairly well reported. So I'm assuming it's true. Going back to your point about the racing car thing, so Mustafa Suleiman, in his book The Coming Wave, he talks about, and I think it was around 2016, what some of the early developments they were doing. And they built, one of the first systems was playing Tetris. Tetris, the block thing where you bounce in the ball and you have to knock down bricks above you.
The one, yeah.
And so basically, to begin with, and they obviously told the system that the goal here is to take out as many bricks as you can, and without dropping the ball, and then you get more points. And after it played for a while, it changed its strategy, unprompted. It basically just started tunneling. It worked out that if it just hit the same area, it could tunnel up behind, and the ball would get in behind the bricks, and then just go and basically win the game. And it did that itself. So it basically, not cheated, because it's within the rules of the game, but it did work out the best strategy, which is interesting.
Which is every human strategy that you work out after playing it for about 10 minutes is exactly the same. And you go, oh yeah, if I just do that, and it happens once by accident, and then you go, oh, okay, I see how this works, and then that's all you do. So yes, and this is my point. I think, and this gets into the second thing that I mentioned before that I wanted to kind of bring into the conversation at some point, but I think everybody has this concept that AI is like somehow different than we are. And I don't think it is. I think by and large, it learns the same way we do, in exactly the same way. It takes a bunch of input, it copies it back to you in the beginning, and then it starts to become more nuanced, and it gets more examples, and it gets more experience. And the more experience it has, the better it is at giving you an answer. The more books it reads, the better answers it gives you, which is, guess what? Just like a human. So, they put us through school, they make us read loads of books. The more books we read, the more knowledge we acquire, the more words we know, the more word combinations we know, and the more smart we sound when we talk. And I think it works just the same way. And I think creativity works the same way. And again, my other point, which is maybe we'll get into, I'm going to shut up because I feel like I've been talking a lot. But the other one is, it's the same thing. Creativity and hallucinations are exactly the same thing in my mind. But anyway.
Well, Ben.
Go on, Ben.
No, I was just thinking. There's certain things which just spark me thinking there in terms of how, for example, generative AI. If I said to my son, we live in a house full of right-handed people. Could you imagine someone left-handed? He'd be like, yeah, no big deal. But there's massive problems with generative AI around if the data sets contain too much of one thing, it gets this bias in it. So, we've talked about this before, the three of us, ask a generative AI to produce an image of a full glass of wine or someone left-handed or a certain, a watch at a certain time, and it can't do it. It can't go off script in a way. And I think, so that's where it's very different. That sort of ability to jump laterally, I think it struggles with. Certainly generative AI does. It's certainly good at processing large amounts of quality data. But as soon as it doesn't have that data, it can't imagine it from nothing. And so I tried this just before we got on. I actually said, create an image of a left-handed person with a full glass of wine. And it gave me half a glass of wine in the right hand. I said, no, in the left hand, holding in the left hand. It just couldn't do it. And, it's because all the data over the years is predominantly right-handed people. It's predominantly a glass of red wine half full is... So that's a really interesting, you'd say that's not very intelligent. It's good at doing the process. And your second point about hallucinations and creativity, I mean, the only thing I would say on that is hallucinations are generating something new, but it's accidental. It's not intentional.
So it's creativity, I would argue.
Well, I think when you're trying to create something, you're trying to create something new out of your knowledge base, but you're intentionally creating something new. Whereas hallucinations are often seen as when you say to something, give me a full glass of wine, and it can't do it, or it gives you something really weird, 6 fingers on a hand, it's because it can't quite do it well. And I think, whereas when we create something new, we're intentionally trying to create something new. I think that's the difference.
Well, I think with humans, if you push them on imagine you're asking a human a series of questions and you keep pushing them on the same thing over and over. I think eventually they'll just start making shit up as well. It's kind of like it's almost like, right, you've asked me this, I've sort of given you my answer, but now you keep asking the same question. I mean, it's just going to start, right, well, I'm just going to tell you something I think you might want to hear. And, I think, and we've all done that, I'm sure. I'm going to propose then, Dave, based on what you were saying, that, so I'm going to agree that humans and in terms of intelligence, are very similar in the way we process and we think and we work, right? But then when we get to the other little bits like the consciousness, emotions, instinct, ethics, all that kind of stuff, I think that's where we're very different from the current systems. It's not to say the systems couldn't be like that one day, and maybe they will, but right now I think that's a difference, and that's why if someone asked us to draw a picture of a glass of wine that's actually full to the brim, we would. Although it would be interesting, wouldn't it, to get 100 people and pose them that question without any previous, understanding, and say, draw 4 glasses of wine. It'd be really interesting to see what they drew, wouldn't it? Because I wonder if most of those people would do the wine with that little bit missing on the top, whether they would fill it to the brim. So we have the capacity to do that, and maybe the AI, because it's just got this training data and it has to go from that, and it has no other option, and it hasn't got that kind of world model or experience or feelings or its ability to flex, doesn't have that. But that isn't the intelligent bit. So I think what I'm trying to say is that we have the idea that with AI, the word I in AI is really just about the intelligence, the knowledge, the data. And on that, I think LLMs can win, because no matter how much or how long a life I live or how much I read or learn, I can't come close to absorbing the kind of information that an LLM could have. So you could ask an LLM any subject and it will give you a detailed answer on it, on any topic, right? My knowledge is limited to my direct experience through my 54 years on this planet. And anything that I've not been directly encountered with or read or seen or done or heard, I don't know. I just don't know. I just don't have that information. So suddenly you have a system, if you say it has this intelligence, it has the biggest data set we've ever seen. we ought to be able to think of ways of then, obviously using that in a really productive way. So then it begs the question, if that is good and as a tool, and it's this vast data set that we can kind of leverage and manipulate, do we even want to try and make it conscious? And this goes back to the point earlier. Do you really want a system that turns around and says, you do it yourself? Well, I'm bored of doing this. I'm super intelligent. I know everything. I'm omnipresent. I don't need to go and do, write a poem for you.
Introduce some kind of hormonal variation to it.
God, no, please. No, I go ahead, Ben.
No, I was going to say it's. I don't think you do. I think. I guess the rush towards AGI is to create more applications to enable it to do more processing, to be able to do more good. But yeah, I don't necessarily think it's something we should rush into.
I think AGI gets rebranded as we go forward. I think it gets redefined and re-leveled because the original definition of AGI, 2 years ago when people started talking about this a lot, it was, well, it's a system, it's a general system that can do everything, right? And it has this kind of consciousness and awareness and, whatever you ask it to do, it's just able to do it. It can do anything a human can do, was kind of the definition. But I think that's going to change. I think it's going to, because I don't think actually ramping up the intelligence component, as we've seen with dogs, being low or people being high, it doesn't change whether it's conscious or not. So I think it doesn't matter how intelligent the system becomes, it won't make it any more or any less conscious. That's almost like a separate problem we have to solve if we wanted to create that, to understand what is actually going on there. Because when you've got plants which have been sort of deemed to be conscious, okay, there's lots of reports of plants that almost work as a team and work as a group and interact, and there are things that on the intelligence scale are very low, right? But on an IQ test they're not going to score highly, right? Or a dog or a cat or a rabbit, whatever it might be. But they have these other things. They're self-aware. They have consciousness. They have emotions. They have instincts. I mean, animals have incredible instincts. The migration, things like that. You think about stuff. Maybe some even have ethics. If you look at kind of in the monkey kingdom, some of the animals, or dolphins or whatever, there's probably some almost moral stuff going on. So, but their brains aren't as evolved in terms of knowledge and intelligence as a human brain. But all that stuff's still there. So I'm not convinced that ramping up knowledge in an LLM system gets us to this kind of AGI idea with all these other skills. I think they're separate things, and we need to figure out where that comes from. But I don't think it comes from a large language model. Is what I'm saying.
One really short point is, with increased brain size and increased intelligence, does that lead to culture and the ability to grieve? There's evidence that elephants grieve. So as the brain size increases, does that increase intelligence, and is consciousness a byproduct of intelligence? I guess is the big question.
And I to build on that, I think the other thing is I think there's this sort of arrogance among humans as well, that we think that we're the only ones that are intelligent and nothing else is. Whereas I think every probably successful animal species that's made it this far is highly intelligent in their own ecosystem and their own environment in which they live. And so, dogs, their smell is 400 times better than a human's. I heard, actually, this was on Joe Rogan the other day as well, where they were talking about it, and they said, they were talking about skunks. Have you ever smelt a skunk? Like actually properly smelt a skunk? Have you ever driven on a road and you could smell it in the air and you're like, there's a skunk somewhere nearby?
Yeah. basically
what they said is they said that that's how a dog smells everything. So that we as humans, we can even smell a skunk a mile away.
Yeah.
And a dog smells everything like that. So a dog can smell us outside when we're coming into the house because their nose is so sensitive, it's like smelling like a skunk from a distance. And then you extrapolate that, and a bear's is 7 times more sensitive than a dog's. So you've got this bear with it's no wonder bears can find a human comes anywhere within a couple of miles of a bear can smell it. Yeah. And they know exactly what it is, and they can smell your food. So that's why, so we are the smartest in our own little universe in which we live, but I think there's also intelligence. Dolphins, enormously intelligent. We know that already. I saw a video, some stupid video the other day on some social media thing where like a lady went and saved this like massive manta ray from a net in the ocean. It had got tangled up in a net. So it wasn't a lady. The lady's the shark lady. This guy was like snorkeling, so he dove down. Anyway, he pulled the net off the manta ray, got back on the boat, and then all these like 100 manta rays started surrounding the boat and swimming around underneath. And then a whale came up to the side of the boat and basically came up and let them pet it. And then dolphins started bringing them fish.
Wow.
Like, and it was like all the ecosystem of the ocean around that area just went, oh, wow, you helped this guy. We're going to bring you stuff and we're going to like come and see you and do nice stuff for you. And it's like, we have no idea what's going on in other parts. We know trees, if one tree starts to die, that the other trees can actually send it water through the root system and everything else. And like, we have no idea what's going on. And I think we're the top most intelligent of our own species and the ones very close to us. But I think intelligence is such a broad spectrum that I think it's really difficult to quantify.
I think many might argue that we're at the top, but we're also the stupidest because we seem to be the ones destroying everything as well.
Exactly. Well, yeah, there's that as well.
The one I was interested in was raccoons in America being able to, after a year, be trained to open 7 different types of lock to be able to get food.
Yeah.
And
I love raccoons. Raccoons are the best.
Just amazing. But crows as well. Apparently,
they have thumbs. Raccoons have thumbs. That's why they can get in so much trouble. Yeah, they do. They have like opposable thumbs, which is why they can get in everything.
Amazing animals. But also, crows pass on. So if they dislike someone because of aggression from a human, they pass that knowledge on to their children. And so the next generation of crows can dive bomb somebody from, in the neighborhood because they've learned that from their parents. Just incredible stuff that we're still learning around
just like
animal
humans.
socialization. Yeah, exactly.
So Ben, you touched on a really important point there, actually, which I wanted to bring up, was this kind of inherited intelligence. Okay, so like we sort of come into the world and instinctively we're scared of certain things or certain. Like colours in nature will make us think, oh, that's dangerous, red, or if it might be, or spiders, or whatever. Or, there's certain things that, have happened in the past to our ancestors, and then that's almost passed down through DNA or something. There's another thing going on there that, again, you're never going to find in a large language model by scraping the internet, are you? So.
Genetic transfer of fear. I mean, do you remember that phase a few years ago? And again, I'm not condoning this, but people putting, I think it was cucumbers behind cats.
Yeah.
And then turning around and jumping like 2 foot, 3 foot in the air. And
it's like TikTok, just that's what made TikTok a thing.
Yeah.
But again, it's debatable whether that's ethical or not. But just that inherited kind of fear for survival again is amazing. Something's transferred from the cat's mother to to daughter or son, and that's incredible.
So, in the context of AI, would we call that bias?
It could be, yeah. But
it's picked up information from millions of humans historically that it now uses to make decisions on certain things when you ask it something.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. The words are slightly different. The behavior is the same.
It's very interesting. And I think that's one of the things about the LM systems we need to really remember a lot of the time is, it's not coming up with its own stuff. It is actually it's got the sum of human knowledge, basically, with all the good bits and all the bad bits and all the nonsense, and everything's in there. And then a bunch of people have sat around trying to work. So say, well, don't behave like that and behave like this, and don't say that and do say this. And what you end up with, as you said, is a very human product, probably in the end, and very much kind of biased to our ways of thinking, and probably would have all those inherited defects, if you like, because that's what we've got and we've passed it onto that system. So
yeah, I was at a talk, and one of the women was from the Far East, and she was saying she had her photo of herself, and she'd asked one of the generative AI to make her image look more professional, and it made her white. And so that kind of inbuilt bias into the AI systems, it's trained on the data set that is probably predominantly white people at the time, and predominantly made in the West. And I know that's changing now, but it was an interesting thing about how AI sort of makes these biases.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that with the which system it was, and I think it was Google, wasn't it, with the sort of Nazis, and then it was kind of putting, making sort of black people into Nazis and stuff, and that was like the reverse situation there, because what had happened is the system, of course, would be biased towards white people being Nazis because that's what most of the training data did. But in an effort that Google had gone in, so we need to make sure everything's diverse. They've then gone in and basically gone so hard on diversity, it kind of overridden the data, so that it's kind of, well, even though a Nazi's most likely going to be white, we better make sure we do some diversity. So we'll do black people instead, and so you get yourself into all these terrible messes, basically, don't you, and difficulties, of how you adjust. And I do worry a lot that basically at the moment, most of the AI systems, maybe apart from Mistral in France, which is doing quite well, but most of them are obviously Silicon Valley, tech bros. It's a certain worldview, isn't it? And it'd be interesting to see over the next sort of 20, 30 years as other countries in different parts of the world with very different cultures develop their own systems and models, really how different they are and what they might look like.
Quite a few coming out from China on the generative video and imagery stuff, which I haven't tested in anger yet, but it'd be interesting to see the biases in those, or lack of.
They were talking about that, one of them on a podcast I was listening to the other day, and they were saying that you can't get it to say anything bad about the president of China and Xi Jinping, and or if you ask it about Tiananmen Square, that never happened. So they very heavily aligning it to fit their audience, their requirement, aren't they? And I think it would be naive for us to think in the West that ours is any different. Of course ours has been trained to kind of reflect the society that a certain group of tech billionaires right now who seem to have control of all of this want. And I think maybe that's my biggest fear for all of this stuff, is that in the end it's in the hands of a few individuals, and seemingly, as we're seeing on social media at the moment, they've got very strong opinions.
And it's whose bias do we use? I think that's the question, and that's what I've been asking on my shows for a year. And that's the thing that worries me, is because the three of us were all on this call, but we were all raised in different places with different people. We've had different experiences. We have different built-in biases, right? And so which one of ours is the correct one? Well, obviously, we think our own is the correct one, and that everyone else is wrong. And so this is what worries me. It's exactly this. And the more rules we put in, and the more we try to stop the bias, the more we create a fictional picture that doesn't exist. And so if we start to create a fictional picture that doesn't exist, at what point does that then create completely unrealistic expectations for real people? Because they look at stuff and they say, oh, but that's how it is because I asked AI, and AI says that I asked for this and it gave me these images and this is what these people look like, when actually, in fact, that's not the reality. And it's someone's messed up idea of what it should be like in some perfect society, but that just doesn't happen. And then that maybe creates it's like the social media problem, right? So you look at all the people and they're all rich and happy and they're, in front of cars and also, all sorts of stuff, but that's not actually how they live. And then everybody becomes unhappy because they think that they're supposed to be like that. And we're creating a fake world that it doesn't reflect reality, because a few people think, oh, well, that's not nice, so we should do it differently. It's like, but the world's not nice. And I'm more of an absolutist, and I think that it should reflect the data. And if we don't like what the data says, it's up to us to change the way we behave so that it gets better data.
Yeah.
And that it will start to reflect based on the newer data. But that's the only way we're going to learn, because otherwise we'll look at it and we'll go, oh, well, everything's okay now. But it's not okay, it's fake.
And like if the three of us were sitting in the pub for an evening and we all had different political viewpoints or religion viewpoints or whatever, we could thrash it out. And I feel sometimes with that fake world that we're pretending is there, where people get so easily offended, or so that we're protecting people's sensitivities. And obviously there needs to be a certain amount of civil discourse and in the public space. But also, that's not the way I've changed my views by arguing with people or being, people telling me a different viewpoint. And that's how we evolve and how we get better at things, I think, sometimes. Of course, we get entrenched into our own viewpoints. But I think that realistic interaction with people who have different viewpoints than you is a...
Do you think there's a danger as well that we end up with such polarized views that the model, because it's training on online data, most of this, right? You end up with very strong views on either side of an argument, and then it's not actually getting much data on most of the people who are in the middle, probably, So it's only seeing these kind of two different kind of crazy views, but the kind of same view that lives somewhere in between. Actually, there's not much data on that, so it's kind of it's either lurching from one to the other. So then you end up again with a kind of quite a volatile.
Agreed. Yeah.
If you're talking about intelligence, you end up with a system that's quite volatile, really, aren't you? Because it's either going one extreme or the other.
I do think social media, chat forums, the internet encourages a more extrovert personality type to interact, because by the very nature of being extrovert, you care less what people think of you, and you're more pushing your viewpoint. But that's not everyone. That's not majority everyone. So there is often this perception of the world in conflict, but that's not true offline. And
one of
I
the
just
things
think
Silicon Valley talk about to address this is synthetic data, that they can create their own data that's not real data, but it's reflective of what ought to be there. And then that would contain less bias, because it wouldn't have the kind of extremes necessarily, or maybe it has a balance of extremes, middle, and but of course the problem with that is whose synthetic data is it in the first place?
Again, yeah.
It's the same problem, isn't it?
It's like almost like a virtual loop of we'll just move the problem just down the road a little bit.
And if it's accurate synthetic data, it will have exactly the same biases in it as well. It just won't.
Same problem.
Yeah.
Kicking the can down the road there. What do you guys think of the UK announcement this week? Having a BBC of AI in a way, a sort of publicly owned AI.
Going to be interesting. Well, Dave, you're sitting on the committee, aren't you?
Are you?
Well, I'm on the APPG. Yeah. I don't know. I think this is what we're going to end up with in pretty much every country.
Okay.
And I've sort of theorized before that kind of where we would end up is that each country or region maybe would end up with its own AI system that roughly aligned to its values. And so people that lived in that region or in that country would have sort of an internal AI that they could use, because I think the values in the US are very different than European values, which are very different than African values, which are very different than Middle Eastern value, right? So I think each one of those areas are going to end up with one big player that's going to kind of, and all the biases and all the rules and all the ethics and all the everything will be geared towards how that culture feels about it. So from an early stage, I think in general, it's a good idea. I've worked in public sector on data projects for nearly a decade now, and I don't see any actual practical way that's ever going to happen. But it's good in theory.
I mean, I had a good look at the report when we put it up in the group and stuff, and my feeling was that it was ambitious. I think the level of kind of scaling they're talking about from where they are today and where they want to be in 5 years, I think it's almost so ambitious it's unachievable. I can't see how they can get to that level in that space of time. So I'm not quite sure who's doing the sums there. And then I think the other big issue, of course, is its public purse, its money. There's a lot of other pressing issues in the country, obviously at the moment, health service to name but one. But again, if 5 years down the road and they've kind of hosed an enormous amount of money into this and their systems are still way behind, say, wherever OpenAI are at that point or Microsoft, there's going to be a lot of questions asked, and I think it becomes difficult. But I do think that what Dave says is spot on. I think over time, because remember, we are not even at base camp on this. We're on the bus to base camp. In terms of the AI, where we'll be in 30 years from now. I think this is the beginning of that conversation, of that road, that journey. And, I think governments and countries will need to look at this stuff and develop their own capabilities over time. But I
It's
think
strategically important from a defense
I
point
think
of
so.
view,
Yeah,
isn't it?
and the same as oil is or anything else was. I think
Yeah.
in defence. So I think over the next 20, 30 years that it will happen. So in that sense, it's good that the UK is starting early on this, because I think it's starting probably before most countries are starting. So that's good, and that might give us some opportunities and afford us, some gain as well. But yeah, I think it's probably over ambitious as they've laid it out. But good on them for giving it a go, I guess.
Did I see that I think it's the US has requisitioned fighter jets now with no pilot.
Okay.
So
I think you were saying
fully
on
automated
previous
planes.
episode, weren't you, that AI was immediately
Well, I know
better
that
at-
AI worked really well, and that
Yeah.
they've had that for a while in sort of test planes, but now they don't even want a human component to it whatsoever. They're like, literally just design a plane that can fly by itself, and there's no capacity for a human pilot in it whatsoever.
It's a massive difference as well. 'Cause I would
Yeah.
talk with the RF about this years ago. I did quite a lot of work with them, but many years ago, one of my roles was working with the armed forces, and you talk to the RAF, and they would say, well, the biggest limitation in a fighter plane is a human.
It's the
'Cause of
meat.
G forces, and you just you can't. They could get it to do way more, but they can't. So you take the human out. It's kind of like you lift the roof on capability, basically.
Yeah. And you take the canopy off the top because the humans don't need to see out, and essentially you've got a missile with a brain in it, which is quite interesting. Gents, I have to shoot.
Yes, we've gone on.
It was interesting though.
It was. Yeah.
Each of those. I mean, there's half the stuff we haven't even covered that we wanted to chat about, but that we can do that in the part B.
Yeah, there we are. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll definitely come back to this subject in the future because it's a moving feast. I think, Ben, you might have an interesting one for next time about kind of how we sort of store up our memories of our family and friends for the future, and how AI could potentially help us with that. So I think that might be a great one. So
Nice cheerful one.
a cheerful one for
No,
this.
let's do it.
I'll come back to that. But we'll be back probably in a month with another episode.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.
Take care. Bye.